in a peer review journal. Because this is a class, it's a different situation. You're writing to learn how to write. But the purpose of research is to come up with new knowledge. And if in our research we come up with new knowledge, it's like, oh, this is worth writing up. And if it's worth writing, the only reason to write it is because you want to share it with the scientific community. And the way that you share it with the scientific community is not through Instagram. It's through, although the Cohen Lab does pretty well with that, but it's through peer-reviewed papers, so journals. So Journal of Wildlife Management, and there are as I think you know by now, hundreds, thousands of all sorts of them. There are dozens of them just in wildlife. In what format you format that paper in depends on the journal, and a lot of them, most of them, have their own specific guidelines, and those guidelines aren't MLA or ALA or whatever. They're Wildlife Society or Journal of American Society of American Foresters or whatever. So if you decide I'm going to try to publish this in the Journal of Wildlife Management, and you submit it and it gets rejected, and you say, okay, well then now I'm going to try to publish it in the Journal of the Southeastern Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. You have to get their citation format and reformat your whole paper the way they want you to. Right? And if they reject it, now I'm going to go for the Journal of the Tennessee Academy of Science, and you reformat it the way they want you to. So that's just, I know it's a hassle. We're making you deal with these little meticulous itsy bitsy things, like you're supposed to put a period there, or that comment is supposed to be a semicolon, or you don't put a space right there. How many of you have had me say that to you on your formatting? You're like, oh my gosh, right? We deal with that too, but we're making you do that because that's something that the scientific community requires, that you have to do. So we're trying to introduce you to that world. Okay. So most articles have a title, they have an abstract. Introduction, maybe a study area, methods, results, and discussion, okay? So you're definitely gonna have introduction, methods, results, discussion. Most articles have an acknowledgement section, a thank you section at the end, and of course they all have a literature cited, and almost all of them have and should have tables and especially figures. And you're required to have at least, I think, one table and one figure in yours. Okay, so I'm gonna go through these. So the title should describe the paper. It's usually an incomplete sentence, not too many words. And a lot of people say, well, is it okay if you use humor? And the answer is usually no, okay, especially with you guys being young. But do you sometimes see articles with funny, with funny titles? Yeah, and usually those are people who are very well established, and they can get away with it. They don't give a damn, and their work is really, really good. And it can stand on its own with or without a corny title. So these are some examples: carbon monoxide, the bowl to go where NO has gone before. Mirror on the wall, who's the most malignant blastoma near of them all? The search for the meaning of Schlief. These are funny titles. Where you are in your professional development, don't be funny. Okay, and usually the purpose. Well, what do you tell me? What do you think is the purpose of humor in a title?
To grab people's attention.
Yeah, to get people's attention, to make them want to read it. Okay, all right, fair enough. The article speaks for itself. Once they start reading it, you got it. So, is there any need for humor within the article itself? No. Yeah. Dry and boring. Okay. So that's a question that comes up sometime, and yeah. So a short, descriptive title, and save the humor for old cocky people. So the introduction should present the question being asked and place it in context of what is already known about it. That's the literature review. We observe this, and it makes me wonder this, and this is what's been done so far. This is what we know so far, and that begs the question. And there's your hypothesis right there, all right? And that's what you've done. And you've taken that literature review, and you're taking our editorial comments to strengthen it and make it strong. and justify your whole paper, your whole study, right? Yes, yes. Okay, all right. Guys, I'm a stickler. You don't, in the real world, they often don't do this. I like a very explicit statement of what your question is, specifically what your hypothesis is. In a lot of studies, they won't say specifically, my hypothesis was this, okay? Because a study might have several hypotheses that they end out testing. But the reason that I want it from you in this paper is because I think a lot of the time you don't have, sometimes folks in this class don't have a very well-formed idea of exactly what their question is. So making you specifically state what your hypothesis is that you're going to test with a statistical test, hold your feet to the fire and make sure that, yes, you know exactly what it is that you're studying. Otherwise, some people are like, yeah, I'm going to look at, what do squirrels like to eat on the quad? Well, what really are you looking at about that? Are you looking at what species? Are you looking at the size of acorn? Are you looking at hard mass versus soft mass? What they like at different times of day, red fox squirrels versus, what specifically? So I want your hypothesis, okay? And then later in the world, you might not have to explicitly state it because you might have a bunch of them. But for now, you need it. Study area. Only include this if you collected field data. Now, you've got a situation where, if the field data is coming from a specific area. So, I don't want to embarrass you, Zakaria, but I'm going to. So we're looking at the Ogallala Aquifer, and you're using secondary data about groundwater withdrawals and its effect on the Ogallala Aquifer. So her question to me earlier was, should there be a study area section? Or maybe that's the question that I inferred from that. And I said, well, there could be a study area section that describes the aquifer in that region, or you could actually just include that kind of within the introduction and not have a study area section at all. Do you agree with that? Mm-hmm. So you could do it either way, right? Mm-hmm. So there's no one magic way. You just use logic to figure, what are my options here? What's the most logical way to do it, okay? Describe the area or areas where data was collected. Include relevant information. What's the state, the county, the size of the area? If it's a habitat study, what are the habitat types, the ages of the forest, conditions, whatever is relevant to your study, okay? If you're doing a study on songbirds, do you need to talk a whole lot about the soil conditions of the study area? Maybe not so much, if they're arboreal songbirds. That's not so pertinent, right? So stick to what's pertinent to your question, okay, in describing that area. Good? Maybe in some studies, elevation is pertinent. In some studies, maybe soil or topography, geography is important. Maybe human density, road density, maybe climate or weather is really important, maybe it's not. So what would be relevant to what you're studying and include it? And it's past tense. Okay. What you're submitting is the study area. Okay. What you're about to submit today, or you've already submitted, is kind of present tense. The study area is this, okay? But when you publish this as a paper later, people are going to be reading it retrospectively, okay? When I did my study last week, this was the condition of the study area. And you're describing it in past tense because maybe somebody's going to come on and clear cut that forest in a month, right? So you don't say it is an old forest. It may or may not be. But when you did the study, it was an old forest, right? And when somebody reads it a year from now, or 10 years from now, or 50 years from now, they're reading it was. We don't know what it is now. We're not going to presume to know what it is now. We just know what it was. So what you're describing in the paper you turn in today is present tense, because you're doing it right now. What you're going to do next is going to be past tense, right? Methods. Describe the materials and procedures used thoroughly enough that others could repeat your experiment, right? You've heard that before. So once you've done it, once you've written it, you could try it yourself, or if you're too deep into it, hand it to a friend and say, read this and tell me, could you replicate this? Could you go do this somewhere else? and let your friends say, if you could tell me what a piezometer is, I could. or they might say, no, this is really unclear. I don't understand what you mean by this. Okay, and they can help you figure out, okay, how do I explicitly state it so that somebody else could do it? At the least, there should be kind of two parts. One part devoted to how you set up and design your study and collected your data, right, specifically, and then the next part devoted to how you analyzed your data. And guys, a lot of the time, y'all get kind of vague on this part, especially in what you're about to turn in today, your data collection. We put out trail cameras and collected photos, and then we're going to analyze those photos to determine, whether they prefer corn or soybeans. Well, how do you analyze those photos? What did you do to those photos? You just look at them and say, well, this one they're using corn, and this one they're using soybeans. What do I do now? No. You have to explicitly say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to divide every day into 1 hour increments. And we're going to count how many photos there were during 1 hour with at least one deer in it. And we're going to take the mean of all. You have to specifically break it down. And so that we can envision, okay, what your test has is 2 columns or 3 columns or 4 columns of data. And what those numbers are is midnight to 1 a.m., how many deer were at the corn pile? Midnight to 1 a.m., how many deer were at the soybean pile? So we can envision every number, right? And if you don't describe it that well, it's too vague. What happens probably more than half the time in this class is you write that methods section, and it comes time for you to analyze your data, and you're like, I don't know how to analyze the data. Why not? Because I don't know what I'm supposed to do with the data that I've gathered. It's because you weren't thinking about it specifically enough and clearly enough. That's where we can do the best you can now and turn this paper in, but we can help you more with consultations later to figure that out. Okay? Good? Past tense. Results. Clear, concise report of the outcome of each experiment. How many of you are doing one statistical test, period? How many of you don't know how many statistical tests you're doing? How many of you are doing 2? Hold up fingers for how many tests you're doing. If you don't know, do this. Okay. All right. This is something you'll need to know by 11:59 p.m. today, right? See Rhubarb, because I'm not going to be here after this class this afternoon if you need help. But it might be that you're just doing a t-test. Well, it's going to be preceded by an f-test, right? An f-test and then a t-test. It might be that you're doing 2 t-tests, preceded by an f-test. It might be that you're doing 1 ANOVA. It might be that you're doing 4 chi-squares. It might be that you're doing a correlation, and while you're at it, a regression. Okay, so you'll provide the outcome of each of those tests with summary statistics. You will not make a table showing your Excel output. Okay, don't do that. Okay. We gave you some examples of what could go in a table, right? A lot of the time, at the beginning of the results, you could provide some initial summary statistics. Like, for example, over the course of 14 nights, my 2 trail cameras picked up 6,481 photographs. In those, 1,214 had photographs of at least 1 deer in them. That's some just early summary statistics, right? And then you get into the analysis that you did, right? Good. I believe, usually the results section is the briefest section, is the shortest section. It might just be a paragraph or 2 for y'all's studies. Y'all's studies aren't too extensive, so it might be pretty brief. But this is where you include typically figures, and you know how to do that now. You know how to do charts, right? those charts show graphically, you know, what that data look like, and that really helps us interpret it. What's all other things being equal, if you have a choice between presenting data as a table or as a chart, which one is usually easier to interpret for the reader? Who thinks table? Who thinks chart? Why aren't you answering me then? Yeah, that's right, you're right. Yeah, charts are definitely easier, right? So is there a place for tabular data? Yeah, there is, but if you have a choice between the two and you could do either one just as easily, do a chart, okay? Definitely. And that's usually where those go. Is there a place for any tables or figures anywhere else? Yeah, there could be. You could have, for example, if there's some complexity to your study areas, you could have a map of a study area. Dr. Grubau's from that old ecology school where that's often not necessary. You know, in wildlife management, often it is, because maybe we're a little bit more subjective, I don't know. But you could have, a map in the study area. Sometimes I've seen studies that had novel approaches to collecting data in the methods section. So they included a figure of their, that showed showed a photo of some apparatus that they constructed or something like that. But usually what you're showing graphically is your results. So you're gonna have pretty short results with maybe a figure or two and then maybe a table. Okay, just the facts. You do not provide any commentary. You don't try to justify or say, maybe, we didn't see any relationship. Maybe the reason for that is, we didn't see any relationship, period. Any commentary is going to be saved for the next session, the discussion section.
So, saying that like charts and stuff will usually have like the mean data presented, is it acceptable to have like that table of data like posted somewhere nearby so readers can see like individual sets of data? Or?
If you typically you're not going to present your raw data.
Okay.
Usually you won't have your raw data in the paper. If there is some way that you can summarize that raw data that provides something that's important and different that you can't easily provide in a figure, then there's times when a table can be justified. And I'm actually asking you to include a table so you can. If you
you say, oh, I need a table, I need a figure. I'm gonna put my data in a table and then produce it as a figure. Do not do that.
Yeah, that's redundant. Yeah.
Do not produce the same table and figure that show the very same data.
Yeah, thank you,
Okay.
good point, right. Yeah, that's redundant. Okay, so just the facts with the results. The discussion is for your commentary. Now, what you don't do is repeat the results again here. Okay, and that's what a lot of students I think are inclined to start with. Okay, let me type out those results again. You've already given that. Okay, we know that. It's right there. So what we're going to do now is talk about, well, what does this mean? What does this mean in the real world? We've talked about statistical significance and biological significance. In the results, you presented the statistical significance. In the discussion, you're going to talk about the biological significance. What does this mean in the real world, right? So, you might review the results of the statistical test supported my hypothesis that there was a significant difference. And then you can go on to expand on that, maybe relate to other papers. Well, so-and-so, Jones, in 2015, found something similar in Ohio. Yeah, but theirs was a little bit of a different situation. We added this element to it, and we found the same thing. So maybe that means that this extra thing that I added isn't a factor, or whatever. How might that be interpreted? Or maybe Jones found the opposite. Why might that be? Why did I find something different than Jones? What's different about my study than Jones? Was Jones just a crappy study? Or did he have a small sample size? Or do you have a small sample size that maybe didn't have much power to detect a difference? Or Was the environment different, and you weren't measuring some environmental variable that changed the outcome, right? What might be the reasons? And you're not saying, do not say, he found this, but I found this, and the reason is because of that. You don't know why the reason is, right? You're speculating about possibilities, and that's avenue for future research. Somebody else might want to look at this to see, why they found this and I found the opposite, or whatever. Okay. In wildlife management is applied vertebrate zoology. Okay, we do much the same research as departments of biology and zoology, but our research tends to be applied. What do you do with that research, right? Adaptive management is incorporating research into management. So we often have maybe a paragraph near the end of the discussion about what does this mean for management? Does this mean anything for management? I've got a graduate student who's been comparing different sizes of barrels for catfish spawning, and he's found that they're actually spawning almost equally in different size barrels, but they're having much higher predation rates in the bigger barrels and much lower predation rates in the smaller barrels. So, what does this mean for lake managers, fisheries managers? Find the smallest barrel that those catfish are willing to spawn in, and that could mean that they'll have less depredation of the egg masses. So that's a management implication. I'm not promising that, but there's some inference here, and future studies might expand on that and look at that more thoroughly. Right? Usually we talk about the most specific things first and most broad things later. And I think one of the things that I often see students in this class make in the discussion section is they talk about if they didn't find a relationship that in their statistical test, they say, well, in the future, they should get a bigger sample size. They just fall back to that. There needs to be a bigger sample size. Well, they often fail to present the alternative answer, which is, maybe you didn't find a relationship because there wasn't one, right? And maybe some of you have small sample sizes, but some of you might have pretty big sample size. And you haven't done a power analysis to determine what sample size you should have used. But don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Don't assume that if you didn't find a relationship, it's because you didn't collect enough data. Maybe it's because there wasn't one. So include that in your discussion, right? Give yourself some credit. Would you?
I agree, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, because it's almost become like everyone went to the same machine and put out the same answer.
Right.
I sample set. Next time do is bigger sample size. Next time, everybody got together and wrote the same damn thing down.
Right.
No.
Yeah. Maybe
Sad.
there's just there wasn't a relationship here. Maybe it was something else. Yeah. Good. Okay. Here, this is the fun part. Everybody should have an acknowledgement section. Should be a brief little paragraph to thank the people that contributed to your study or made it possible. And guys, anybody who helped you, your roommate, a friend, somebody helped you collect data. If somebody let you put trail cameras out on their farm, your parents or a family friend or whatever, include those. If the secretaries in the department let you make copies, thank them. Whatever. You don't have to thank Guba and I. We understand that we helped you. That's our job. You don't have to give us credit. But we're not going to grade that heavily. But just that's your chance to thank people. And it's good form to do so. Okay. Just 2 or 3 sentences. Literature cited. Okay, I think you all know this, but when we looked at that first assignment, not everybody did it very well. So let's be clear. Okay, list all published work that's mentioned cited in your paper. So that's to say, anything that you cite in that paper has to be in the literature cited section, and anything that's in the literature cited section has to be cited in your paper. You can't go out at the beginning and look for a bunch of relevant sources and come up with 15 of them and end up citing 6 of them in your paper, but keep the other ones, on standby. No, you gotta get rid of them. If you didn't use them, you gotta get rid of them, okay? Good. Now, I said anything that you cite in your paper has to be in literature cited. There is an exception to that, according to Journal Wildlife Society format. If you get information from something personally, from someone personally, they just tell you something and they are an authority and you cannot find that that's published somewhere, according to the Wildlife Society, you can put in parentheses, J. Grubaugh, personal communication, PersCom. And you don't have to put that in the literature cited, okay? But anything else you cite. And in a peer-reviewed paper, you know, internet sites and gray papers don't count. Don't use those. Don't use those. Okay, find something better. Okay. Alphabetical order, hanging indents, and you can do hanging indents in one of two ways. You can use the hanging indent function within Microsoft Word, assuming you're using Word. And if you don't know how to do that, you can Google help, and it'll tell you how. Or if you absolutely hate it and can't figure it out, then you can use the tab function for every single double line. All right. It would be good for you to figure out how to use the hanging indent function. But who doesn't know what hanging indent is? Does everybody know what it is? Yes. Okay. Okay. When you have a paragraph, every line except the first is indent. Okay. And then follow the format specifically. And this is where we're following the Journal of Wildlife Management, which I have more direct experience with than Dr. Grubaugh. He publishes in those secondary journals like Nature and Science and stuff like that. So feel free to come to me if you have questions about format that you can't figure out. Tables and figures, okay. Along with the title and the abstract, which I'll talk about shortly, these are the most closely scrutinized part of your work. Before journals were all online, I used to go each summer to the library and grab all the journals from the past year that I looked at a lot, pile them up with a cup of coffee, and I would go through them and read the titles. And I would mark the titles that looked interesting. And then I would go through and read the abstracts of all those. And then I would mark the abstracts that looked interesting, and then I would go through and read the articles that were still interesting to me. And actually, no, abstracts. Next, I would look at tables and figures. And a lot of the time, that's as much as I needed, because that gave me the guts of the study. That gave me the relevant stuff. And if it was really, really up my alley, then I would read the whole article. But a lot of the time, scientists don't ever get to the text, because they can get what they really need from the abstract and the tables and figures. Okay, so this is your opportunity to shine. Don't just think, what's the simplest figure I can make out of this to check the box that I've done a figure for Pelrin? Okay, think what's the best way to highlight and showcase what I'm studying, right? Think about it. Play with it. Try different styles. Try different arrangements. Of course, I think you know, you should be able to print a figure that with its caption you can hand to somebody and they can read the caption and it stands alone. That you wouldn't have to give it any more context for them to understand what you're talking about. So it needs to have a thorough enough caption. And I'll talk a little bit more about tables and figures in a minute. I'm going to show you some examples and we can talk about it. Okay, the abstract. Now, when you were younger, you wrote a paper and it was often ended maybe in English classes with a summary or maybe a conclusion. This is what we do instead. and we put it up at the front so that people don't have to go to the back of the paper to get to it. Okay, this is the Cliff Notes version, and sometimes that's all people read. So you put it after the title, before the introduction, okay? And it condenses the whole paper into 1 or 2 paragraphs, okay? What was your hypothesis? What was your experiment? What was your results? If there's any real meaningful implications to that, what are they, right? So just a summary. Place at the beginning, I just told you why, because they don't want to have to go to the end. They want to read that first to see if the article is worth reading. Okay, good? Okay, I think we gave you examples in the assignment, so you can look at those. A lot of problems that we often see with papers, not citing literature properly, just general lack of polish. It has bad grammar, it doesn't flow well. For myself, the way that I deal with that is start with an outline. And you you can even do an outline of each section. And I think some of the sections pretty much, they flow pretty easily. But where you can easily get lost and bogged down is in the discussion. Because, it's kind of wide open to what do you want to talk about. So people can go chasing squirrels, go off in all different directions. So starting with an outline, what's the most important point I want to make, and then what's next, and what's next, and this next point's got 3 subpoints, et cetera. And then just expand those out into paragraphs, right? So once you get it edited, have people look at it. Have people tell you, that it all made sense, but I kind of struggled with this transition right here, or what the hell were you talking about here, or whatever. Okay, so really multiple drafts. People don't follow publication guidelines, so whatever guidelines I have, look at those. And then just basic English. Use active voice rather than saying traps were placed. I placed traps. You did. It's okay to admit it. Okay, it's all right. You can say it. I did this. Okay. Placing traps. Wildlife should not be able to see it. Don't dangle your participles. Abstract nouns. It was placed. What was placed? I placed it here. I put out traps and bait, and I put them. You put them. What them? The traps or the bait or both, right? So specify what you're talking about. Be very specific. Vague or incorrect wording leading to imprecise interpretations of what you're trying to say. Sentence fragments. Be sure that you're using whole sentences. Changing verb form in mid-sentence from active voice to passive voice or vice versa. Be consistent in your style. Be sure that if you start out talking about something singular, you keep on using singular or plural. Keep it plural. Noun clusters, stack modifiers. These are all common issues that you know from 8th grade. Okay, you might not remember, but if you need help, the Writing Center can help you with that basic grammar stuff. Okay, we don't want to have to mess with basic grammar, guys. Y'all are past this.
Yeah.
You're junior level stuff. But we do wildlife. Okay, let the English people. I mean, we'll correct it if we have to, but we don't want to have to.
Yeah, look at those first 3 there, proper citation, lack of polish, failure to follow the guidelines. When you do those things, you are sending a message to us that you don't care about your paper. Well, I promise I won't care either, and I will grade accordingly.
Yeah.
If you haven't taken the time to do those things, well, this must not be worth anything to you. So again, you assume you can do all that. It's not our job to do it. Like Dr. Howard says, get help.
A lot of this is an exercise in meticulousness, and we know meticulous can be a hassle and painful sometimes for all of us, but it's the price we pay to get something made immortal in the scientific record. Okay, a little bit about figures and tables. Like I said, this is the most closely scrutinized part of your work along with the title. A lot of potential, so design it carefully. It should stand alone. They're cited in text like this. We detected a difference in use of acorns and corn. And then we put in parentheses, table 1. You don't have to say, see table 1, or table 1 shows a difference. Just do that, okay? Figure 2, table 3, okay? That's all you have to do, is just put it in parentheses to refer to it. Okay, good. You put the heading of a table at the top. You put the heading of a figure at the bottom every time. I don't know why. It's just the way it is. Just do it. Okay. And I will tell you that different authorities use different terms for the heading. I have seen title, legend, heading, and caption all used to refer to the descriptive verbiage above the table and below the figure. By different authorities. So sorry about that, vague inconsistency, but just understand that that we might be talking about different things. And to make it more complicated, you might have a figure that has a heading, and it also has a legend off to the side that shows anything in red is this, anything blue is this. In that case, the heading is up here and the legend is over here, but somebody else might be calling that the legend. So it gets confusing, but just know that's the case, okay?
So is that is that specifically like the caption that was discussed before, like that describes a thing, or would this be like the axes titles or?
No, it's the caption that describes the thing.
Okay.
Yeah, the axis title is the axis title.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm going to make this point now. This is premature, but we'll make the point again later. I want to be sure you know this. When you do this in Excel, it's going to give you everything, your axis titles and everything in probably like 12-point font or whatever. And when you type it, print it on the paper, it'll be fine. When you take that figure from your paper that you made in Excel and put it into a PowerPoint slide, that 12-point font will not be readable from the back of the room. So when it's time for you to turn that figure into something for a presentation, I'm gonna be pickier than he is on this, okay? But I'm gonna demand that you get your fonts way bigger, including your axis titles and all the little fonts in that figure. I'm gonna say at least 24 point. I'll talk about this more later. It's gonna be crazy big, okay? Not huge, but big enough to read from the back of the room. I'm really picky about that. And I will tell you, I'll ask you, how many of you have been to a conference and you couldn't read the slides? I want to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, about over half of you, yeah. It's gotten worse and worse and worse. And I think what happened was during COVID, when all the conferences were remote, you didn't have to make it bigger because everybody was looking at the computer screen right there, and 12-point font was just fine. And they stopped making the fonts bigger. They don't even know how anymore. But when you go back to a room and the old geezers like he and I are back in the back, we can't read squat. So it's really important that you make those fonts bigger, not in the paper, but in the presentation, okay? Okay, he might disagree with me on this, and I'll let him if he wants to. I am perfectly fine with you putting your figures and then your tables, figures first and then tables, at the end of the paper, okay? Rather than embedding them in the middle of the text. One of the reasons is because when you embed them in the text before you're through with the paper, and then you edit it some more, and we give you some comments, you edit some more, everything gets thrown off. And you have to dink with it and mess with it and shuck and jive with it. And that's just junk that you don't have to do if you just put it all at the end. You feel free to disagree.
I'm all for putting it at the end.
Yeah.
Tables and figures at the end, design, you can find it, you go back,
Yeah.
you know where they're at.
And that's what you do when you submit a manuscript for publication as well. You put them at the end. Okay, good? All right. Figures first and then tables.
Tables and figures.
Huh?
Tables and figures.
What did I say? Figures first. Yeah, that's wrong. Tables first and then figures. So sorry. Yeah, tables first and then figures. Sorry about that. Yeah. Okay. What do you think? Is it okay if you're looking at somebody else's paper and they've got a table or a figure that shows something really good? Can you just use their table and figure? Is that okay to do?
With correct credit, I believe.
With correct credit?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And or permission.
If you're comparing.
If you're comparing? Okay. There's nothing that says that you can't use their information, but if you're publishing work, what I often have seen in this class is somebody will just essentially cut and paste somebody else's table or figure. I mean, just cut and paste the whole thing. It's their font, it's their, I've even seen like where it says figure 3B, and it would be your figure 2. You haven't even changed the heading or anything, If you're gonna use their data, I would argue that it's good for them to make your own damn table or figure and put it into it. And you definitely have to cite it, absolutely critically have to cite it. But if you're comparing their stuff to yours, create a table or a figure that has their information and your information in it, right? But just cutting and pasting somebody else's entire table or figure into yours is that's kind of 8th grade, guys. We're way past that.
It should appear in your discussion, not in your results. The table probably,
Yeah, and that usually doesn't happen. Right. Yeah, it certainly doesn't go in your results because that's not your results.
exactly.
Right. Good, okay. Tables, okay, so table means it's tabular format, so it's data, it's numbers, and it's in rows and columns, right? Anything else is a figure, and that can be a chart like you've made, any type of a chart. It can be a map, it can be a picture, or whatever, any of that is a figure. But a table is just rows and columns and numbers. They should have Wildlife Society format, guys. A table has 3 lines. Okay, here's your headings. There's a line at the top above your headings, a line below your headings, and then here's your data. You got a line at the bottom below your data. 1, 2, 3. You get rid of all these lines in here, okay? You get rid of all those vertical lines. So you've got 3 lines. That's it, okay? And at this point, you're asking, you can get rid of lines? How do you get rid of lines? And you can do that within Word or wherever in the
You do it in Excel too. Yeah.
in Excel as well. You can go to, there's any number of ways you can do it, table or and you go to the outlines. Lines are outlines, and it says just keep the line at the top. If you highlight this row, for example, and you go to outlines, it'll say line at the top, or do you want a line at the bottom, or do you want all your lines, or none of your lines, and you can just specify. You can highlight the whole body and say, I just want a line at the top and below the body, and that's all I want, and it gets rid of all the others. If you need help, either of us can help you with that, okay? More complex tables can have more stuff. So say, for example, you've got subheadings here and here. You might have underlines for these. So you could have a few extra lines in there if you have a more complex table. Most of you probably won't need that. Most of your tables will be very simple. You're just going to want in the 3 lines only. You got it? Picky, I know.
Is there a reason that a lot of publications don't like the, I guess, essentially grid lines, like lines actually showing you what data aligns to what? Because I know most people can just eyeball it and know what aligns to what heading or title, but half the time I have to use a pencil to figure out what is on level with what.
I don't know. I think I don't know. It just seems I've always just assumed that it's less clutter. It's simple. You don't
It's real
need it.
distracting to me.
Yeah, more lines are distracting. Yeah, it's just cleaner and it's just consistent so that people get used to seeing these hundreds and thousands of these things, reviewing these things. The format is familiar. You're not having this. Okay, what have we got here? Interpreting the whole table. It's just easier to quickly format. To understand. Okay. Yeah, don't use Excel output table. Create your own with just the relevant data that we've talked about: sample sizes, mean, standard deviation, R values, B values, etc. And like I said, tables are almost always associated with your results section. You probably aren't going to need them anywhere else. Okay. Figures. Usually charts for you guys that you will have created in Excel. They could be photographs or maps. You might have a study area map or something if that's relevant for a figure. Some examples of figures that I think are impactful. This actually is probably one of the most cited figures that I've seen in wildlife management. And I've seen this in probably dozens of presentations at different meetings. I'm not seeing it as much anymore because we have a lot more, but this shows a decline in Christmas bird count data in North America for the northern bobwhite and for the loggerhead shrike. Now it's got those extra lines that, that it shouldn't have, but it's a figure, not a table. So what do you infer from this figure? What might you infer from this figure?
There's a negative trend
There's a negative trend of what?
of,
Of both Bob White and Loggerhead Shrike. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Looks like crap. Oh, yeah, sorry. It's that's my fault. Yeah, I probably did a cut and paste. Yeah, that doesn't look very good. But let me ask. In wildlife management, which do you think has been more heavily studied, northern Bob White or Loggerhead Shrike?
Bob
Bob White, right? We're real familiar with long-term declines in Bob White in wildlife management, okay, in eastern North America. That's one of our biggest failures and frustrations, right? And for in the late 1900s, not so much today, we've kind of got past this today, but in the 1970s and 80s and 90s and the first decade or so of the 2000s, what were some of the reasons given for the potential reasons given for the decline of Bob White? Habitat loss was one. What other reasons? What other reasons do you think hunters and landowners usually threw out there first? Predation, right. What might, given that, this chart provide any inference for? Does that question make any sense? What I've said. These two birds, what we know that Bob White is a grassland bird. Loggerhead Shrike, does it use a similar habitat? Okay, nobody knows birds. Okay, it does. It does. Uses a similar habitat. But it's more of an arboreal species, okay, than a ground species. And people have argued that northern Bob Whites are being consumed by ground predators and such. And so many biologists were making the argument that it doesn't prove anything. Because this is a what? It doesn't prove anything.
it's a correlation.
It's a correlation. It is not
Causation.
Causation, right? Yeah. It doesn't. So we can't say that because one is declining, the other is declining. But we can say, boy, that's an awfully close correlation, isn't it? I mean, just looking at it, those are that decline is closely correlated. So if something's predating one, I guess it could be predating the other at a similar rate. But could it be more likely that these guys, what they most have in common is habitat? So could it be that habitat is the primary reason for their loss? And that's what this has been used time and time and time again to imply or suggest or infer. It's pretty strong chart. This was another really ugly chart, but this was provided by a guest speaker in one of my classes who was talking about wildlife policy a while back. He was from the Wildlife Management Institute. And this showed federal funding opportunities for wildlife and habitats from different federal sources. So this is the North American Wetland Conservation Act, Ecological Society of America grants, Endangered Species Act grants, sorry. Pittman-Robertson money, Conservation and Reinvestment Act, Carolite, and the Farm Bill program, CRP, etc. And this is dollars times 1,000, right? So $3.5 billion, right? Or 3.2, almost $3.3 billion from Farm Bill relative to all these others. This shows, okay, you want to look at where's money? People say, oh yeah, Farm Bill's fine, but let's really work on CARA. Well, this is what CARA has got us. This is what the Farm Bill has got us. That's pretty powerful, right? But can you abuse bar charts?
Yes.
What's the easiest way to abuse a bar chart?
By kind of I can't figure the correct wordage for it, but that's a pretty even distribution of numbers on the y-axis there. You can make it to where one starts at
screw around with the y-axis
Yeah,
is what you're trying to
pretty
say.
much.
That's right, that's right. I'll come back to this one, okay. Screw around with the y-axis. Same data, different y-axis. Take a look. Can you read it in the back?
What?
So you've got 3.14 to 3.15. We have 0 to 3.5. Okay. All we did was change the y-axis values, right? So, if we want to say, nah, it's not a big deal, do this. If we want to say, it's a crisis, everybody run for cover, do this, right? As a scientist, we have an obligation to try to tell the truth and be impartial. So what should you do? You could do it either way. What should you do?
Figure out if there is a significant difference.
Okay. Figure out if there's a significant difference and talk about that significant difference in the p-value. That's really good. Okay, that's good.
It kind of reminds me of like when you would or wouldn't use like a regression trend line. Like if there wasn't a significant difference, then don't show it like it is on the
Right,
left.
right. I could split the difference. I could make the y-axis start at 1 or 2 and go up to 3.5, and that would show that it'd be somewhere in the middle. I could start it wherever I want to, right? What am I trying to do? What's the point I'm trying to make? Whatever it is, I guess I would just argue that to be ethical, you shouldn't try to sensationalize your results. Yeah, you could say, this looks extravagant, but look, I'm going from 3.14 to 3.15 and there's no significant difference here, okay? Just make that point, be clear in your communication. They say you can make statistics, do whatever, you support whatever argument you have, and you can in a lot of different ways, but you should ethically be honest with it. Many of you have seen this in one of my earlier classes, right? From 1940 to projected 2030, human population density in the southeastern United States, right? Graphically, that's powerful. There's no data, there's no statistics, there's no analysis that went on here, but graphically, it's powerful. We don't need all these. This is combining a table and a figure, and that's redundant and not good, what not to do. But this shows this graphically. Which more quickly can you digest and infer from? The top, right? Obviously. This shows to me the power of a figure over a table used well. Good? One of Dr. Grubau's favorite things is pie charts. He would like for you to be sure you get. I'm teasing. Don't put a pie chart in there. Right? Anything you'd like to say about pie charts, Dr. Grubau? Okay. Generally, there's a better way to do a pie chart. Okay. I know they're easy and fun, but usually in research they're not very useful. Would there be a better way to present this data? Same data. Is that a little bit more objective, a little bit more useful? Okay. We tend to like bars. Bars tend to work better than pies for us. Okay. All right. What questions do you have for me about the paper? About what I've been talking about? Okay. You've got a part 2 due here in a few hours. How many of you have already turned it in?